Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for bearing with me with no camera. I look like a car crash today. But we're gonna get like stuck straight in. I hope that you're in a space where you can listen to me and truly absorb the the level of grief, but also the level of love currently being held in Sudan. I want to first tell you about a man called Muhammad Adam. He is 56 years old. Last October, he gathered his family and ran from a city called El Fasher. Jeremy, do you want to go to the next slide? He ran because to stay was to die. As they ran, fighters shot his 13-year-old daughter and then his son, who was 1.5 years old. When Muhammad asked if he could carry his children's bodies away just to bury them, the men threatened to kill him too. I'm going to come back to Muhammad at the end, but I have to tell you how the world let this happen to him. And I have to warn you of one thing first, because it is the thread that runs through everything I will say this evening. None of this was a surprise. Every single step of it was seen coming. It was foretold. For 18 months before Muhammad ran, El Fashir was strangled. The Rapid Support Forces dug a trench and built a wall of sand around the entire city so that aid could not get in and people could not get out. 250,000 people were sealed inside. They ate animal feed, then leaves, and then nothing. And in October, the city fell, and 6,000 people were killed in 3 days. In one neighborhood, there was so much blood that the scientists at Yale could see it from a satellite from space. This February, the UN said the word my people had been screaming for 2 years, the hallmarks of genocide. Next slide, please. So this is the El Fashir Resistance Committee statement, and I'm sharing it because it's something that really affected me when I first read it. We announced today the fall of the city as the last sound of weapons had been extinguished when the last resistance soldier fired his final bullet in the face of the militia inside El Fashir, then was martyred standing, just as he was born standing, and as a guardian of the land he loved until his very last breath. The city has fallen, but its dignity has not. The bodies have vanished, but the spirit remains, fluttering over the walls and streets, guarding what remains of the memory. Every stone here bears witness that its sons did not surrender, and that El Fashir has not been defeated, but has been let down, and has paused to write a new chapter in its history. This is where it ends, but to understand it, I cannot start with war. I have to start with what Sudan is, because you cannot grieve something you were never shown. Next slide, please. Tell me honestly, when I say Sudan, what picture comes to mind? For most of the world, it's only ever famine and war. So let me give you my country back for a moment. Sudan sits where the two Niles meet, the Blue Nile coming down from the Ethiopian highlands, the White Nile from the heart of Africa, joining it in at Khartoum into the river that built civilization. And in the Sudanese desert stand more than 250 pyramids, more than twice as many as in all of Egypt. They were built by the Kingdom of Kush, the Nubian kings and queens, a civilization that rivaled Egypt and at one point ruled it. Queens who held real power, one of whom lost an eye fighting the Roman Empire and won. You were probably never taught this, and that's not an accident. 19th century Europe simply refused to believe Black Africans could have built something so sophisticated. Sudan is a land of poets and musicians, of a hospitality so deep that we have a word for it, nafir, for the way a community drops everything to show up for one another. Hold that word, because it comes back at the end of tonight. Since the war began, archaeologists and ordinary volunteers have been risking their lives to guard the pyramids and the National Museum, which has already been gutted. So when I talk about what is being destroyed, I do not only mean lives. I mean a 5,000-year-old country. Now, how do you break a country like that? You start, as so often, with empire. Next slide. The news will call this tribal, ancient hatreds, two sides who have always fought, a civil war. That is a lie, and it's a convenient lie because it means no one alive has to take responsibility, but somebody built these fault lines. Under British colonial rule, Sudan was governed by divide and rule. Wealth and power were poured into the center around Khartoum, while the edges, Darfur, Kordofan, the south, were deliberately starved of roads, schools, hospitals, of everything. The hierarchy of Arab over non-Arab that the killers still use to sort their victims today was hardened into this machinery of the state. Darfur's poverty was not bad luck. It was actually designed, and some of that designing was done in this country. So when you hear tribal, I need you to hear instead engineered. The ground for this war was prepared a century ago, and partly by us. But the man who turned that engineered fragility into 30 years of suffering has a name. Next slide, please. In 1989, a man named Omar al-Bashir seized power in a coup, and he held my country in his fist for 30 years, 3 decades. Most of my generation never lived under anyone else. His rule was built on exactly the colonial logic he inherited: feed the center, punish the edges. When Darfur rose up against that neglect in 2003, Bashir's answer was the Janjaweed, the Arab militias he armed and unleashed to burn, rape, and kill their way across Darfur. That's the first genocide, and it's one that the world has already forgotten. And in 2013, he took those same militias and made them official, with a name and a budget and a flag: the Rapid Support Forces. Remember that. The man who is starving El Fashir today was created by the dictator as a tool. Bashir ruled through fear, through religious policing, through war. In a single year, some 15,000 Sudanese women were sentenced to flogging under his public order laws. For 30 years, the world treated him as a fact of nature, a wanted war criminal, indicted by the International Criminal Court, but a fact of nature all the same. And then my generation decided he was not a fact of nature. And what happened next is the most important thing I will tell you tonight, because it's the thing this entire war exists to destroy. Next slide, please. It began in December 2018 in a town called Atbara over the price of bread, and it spread and it spread until April 2019. Hundreds of thousands of people occupied the square in front of the military headquarters in Khartoum and simply refused to leave. Now, I need you to picture this sit-in because it's one of the most beautiful things a country has ever done. People of every age, every tribe, every class and religion camped together for weeks. The walls became murals. There was poetry. I mean, there was music. Doctors treated the wounded, and one was killed trying to revive other protesters. And it was led, overwhelmingly, in a conservative country by women. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of the protesters were women. We called them Kandakas, after the warrior queen of Kush, the same queen whose pyramids I just told you about, 3,000 years apart, and the very same women. One of them was an engineering student named Ala Salah, which you will see in this picture here, stood on the roof of a car in a white tob and led a crowd in revolutionary poetry. Someone took a photograph and it traveled the entire world. The woman in white became the face of what we called the women's revolution. And it worked. On the 11th of April 2019, the military announced that Bashir was gone. It was the closest we'd ever come to a free, civilian-led democracy in Sudan, and for a moment, the world cared. But two generals were watching that square, Burhan of the army and Hamedi of the RSF, and they understood something we were too hopeful to see, that a free Sudan had no place for either of them. So on the 3rd of June, 2019, they answered our revolution. The RSF and other security forces tore the peaceful sit-in with gunfire. Almost 90 people were killed. Dozens of women were gang raped. Bodies were weighted and thrown into the Nile. That massacre is the key to everything that's happened since, really, because this war, all of it, is the same two generals finishing what they started that way. This war is a counter-revolution. It is the punishment for the crime of wanting to be free. Hold that, because everyone will try and tell you this is chaos or a civil war or tribalism or two equal sides in a squabble. It is not. It was a revolution, and the men strangled it. Next slide. So I want you to unlearn the phrase civil war when it comes to Sudan. Completely, it's such a bugbear for me. This is a nation that is split, two armies at each other's throats. One runs the general army, which is the one in the green, and the other one runs the militia, which is the one in Also the green, but the lighter green. This is that war, two men and their greed. The Sudanese people did not choose this and are not a side in it. I want you to understand that. They are the thing being fought over. It is thought that between 400,000 people and 600,000 people have been killed. 14 million have been driven from their homes, a quarter of the entire population, the largest displacement crisis on the planet. And here is the number that tells you how alone we've been left. This year, the aid Sudan needs is 8% funded. 8%. I mean, this is like the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, and it's being answered with almost nothing. But a number is a place to hide from a person, I found. So before I tell you who did this, let me make you feel those numbers, what those numbers actually mean. Next slide, please. 14 million displaced is not a statistic. It is 14 million mornings of waking somewhere that is not home, not knowing if you will eat. I want to start with hunger, because here, hunger is not an accident of war. It is a weapon of war. Both sides are blockading aid, looting food, burning crops. The result is a biblical level famine, confirmed region after region, and more than 4 million children acutely malnourished. In North Darfur alone, a child was treated for severe malnutrition roughly every 6 minutes. And those were the ones that actually reached the help, right? Then the deliberate destruction of medicine. More than 70% of the hospitals in the war zones have been destroyed. This was not collateral. The WHO has verified almost 300 separate attacks on healthcare, with more than 2,000 people killed in attacks on the very places meant to save them. And when you destroy the hospitals and the clean waters together, you get the third killer. As the Lancet put it, when water and hospitals become targets, cholera becomes inevitable. More than 120,000 cholera cases in Sudan, 3,000 dead. Diseases that we've known how to stop for a century, killing people because there's nowhere left to treat them. So this is the cost. A country where you can starve, where the hospitals are rubble, where cholera takes the child the bullets missed. Now, who did this? Let's name them, all of them. Next slide. I think the cruelest part for the Sudanese people is that actually none of this is new. We're watching a horror that they've already, really had to survive. Between 2003 and 2005, Bashir's Janjaweed killed around 200,000 people in Darfur and drove 2 million from their homes. In 2004, the Americans called it genocide. They burned the villages, raped as a weapon, poisoned the wells so that no one could return. And as I told you, they were never punished. They were promoted into the RSF. So the militia besieging Al Fashir is quite literally the same force that committed the genocide 20 years ago. Same killers, same victims, the same erased villages. The world watched the first genocide and did nothing that mattered, to be honest. So now the Sudanese are burying their children twice. And the man who turned that militia into a personal empire, let me show you who he is, because he is the key to who is funding this. Next slide. Now, I think my mum told me this only recently, but Hemedi was a camel trader from the borderlands who dropped out of school as a boy. When Darfur rose up in 2003, Bashir expanded the Janjaweed, and Hemedi's men were among them. Then he found the thing that made him untouchable. After he seized the goldfields in 2017, the RSF stopped needing anyone's permission for anything. That gold is worth an estimated $1.2 billion a year. Today, this man, a school dropout with a mandate from no one, controls roughly half of my country, as you can see in the corner. I believe that the red is the RSF and the green is like SAF strongholds. But I want you to remember that word, gold, because Hamedi runs his empire from Dubai, and the gold from our mines is sold in the UAE. Gold is the thread that will lead us, in a moment, out of Sudan and to the people funding this. But first, I have to say something about the other general, because if I only tell you about the RSF, I'm not telling you the whole truth. Next slide. And this matters to me as much as anything I will say tonight, because if I don't say it, you shouldn't really trust me. The RSF committed the genocide in El Fasher. I mean, that's documented, and nothing I'm about to say will soften it. But this is not a war of a good army against an evil militia. It is two armed forces making war on the same people, the Sudanese people. The regular army has its own record of horror. In a single airstrike campaign in late 2024, the SAF killed more than 500 civilians. Our own rights group called it indifference to defenseless people, and it also has its ethnic atrocities. In Jazeera, CNN and the UN documented an army-led campaign against non-Arab farming communities where people were killed en masse, villages were burned, bodies were thrown into the irrigation canals and into hurried mass graves. The UN's investigators are clear. Both the SAF and the RSF are responsible for large-scale attacks on civilians. And I'm telling you this not for false balance. The scale of al-Fashir is not equal to anything, but because the Sudanese people deserve a movement that tells the truth about all their killers. I'm not asking you to back a side here. I'm asking you to back the people both sides are slaughtering. And that is exactly why it matters who is funding them, because neither of these armies could do this alone. Next. The chief sponsor of the RSF is the United Arab Emirates. UN investigators, leaked intelligence, and the survivors themselves all point to the UAE as the main force enabling this militia. A leaked UN report found credible evidence of weapons sent to the RSF several times a week through northern Chad. The UN's own experts confirmed this, a constant rotation of cargo planes and an air bridge of guns. And listen to how they hid it. They disguised the airbase in Chad as a hospital. They flew it under the symbol of the Red Crescent. They faked the flight papers and they made the planes disappear from the radar. They used the emblem of mercy to smuggle the weapons that killed the Sudanese people. And why? Gold and the Red Sea coast. They deny every word of it. They say there's no proof. Weigh that denial against a fake hospital and a vanishing plane and decide for yourself what it is worth. And the UAE is not alone, as we'll see on the next slide. I think the best way to describe this is a proxy war, and almost every regional power has a hand in it. Chad is the doorway, the weapons come through northern Chad. Egypt has long backed the army on its southern border, and Russia, through the Wagner Group, sank its hands into our gold fields years ago. The RSF's rise after 2017 came hand in hand with Wagner support, both of them in it for gold and the guns. Even the Gulf states that welcomed the fall of Bashir, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, rushed to bankroll the General's Council the moment our revolution put a crack in the old regime. Also, recently, Ethiopia actually sent drone strikes to Khartoum. They train RSF fighters in camps. I mean, there's this girl that I follow on Twitter, and she often makes the joke that we have like the worst neighbors ever. And I think I agree. I mean, and this is, I think, the part that, I'm, you know, making a joke out of, but it's actually enraging. Every powerful country looked at Sudan burning and saw a general worth backing and a revenue stream worth protecting. Not one of them looked at us and saw a people worth saving. Sudan's not a country at war with itself. Sudan is a country being fought over on top of the bodies of its people. And one of the powers with its hands in this, the one supposed to be holding the pen, is the country we are standing in. Next slide. This is not a distant tragedy with no link to us. The UAE, the chief sponsor of the RSF, is armed by France, by the United States, and by Britain. And British military equipment sold to the UAE has been found in the hands of the RSF inside Sudan. It was the first time UK-made equipment was traced into Sudan this way. Trace that line with me, all the way to the end. A British factory, a buyer in the Gulf, a grave in Darfur. In Parliament, MPs have asked the obvious questions. Did the government push for a full embargo? Did it even consider the UAE a party to this war? The answers have not come. We are arming the arsonist while the house burns, but the weapons are the smaller half of Britain's role, because Britain is supposed to be the one stopping this. Next slide. Of every country on earth, the one with the job of leading the world's response to my country is this one. Britain is the penholder for Sudan at the UN Security Council. We write the resolutions. We lead the negotiations. We're the ones that when the world acts on Sudan, it's supposed to act through Britain's hand. That's real power, the power to have done something. And what did we do with it? As El Fashir was being strangled, the Foreign Office drew up four options to protect civilians and chose the weakest one on that list. They chose it after their own officials had warned that the city would fall and that mass ethnic killing would follow. One reviewer said it in words I can't get out of my head. By choosing an action, the UK has made itself complicit. We held the pen. We were warned. The warning was specific and it was correct. The fall of El Fashir was not a shock to anyone in our Foreign Office. It was foretold. And I keep saying that word, foretold. So now I want to ask myself what it actually means, I guess. Foretold means it was seen coming, and seen coming means that it was preventable. And preventable means that somewhere, someone with the power to stop it looked at the warning and chose the weakest option on that list. This was not a storm. Nobody chooses a storm. This was a choice. Muhammad Adam's children did not die because the world didn't know. They died because the world knew and decided that other things mattered more. And that should make you angry. But I did not bring you here only to grieve, because there is another Sudan, and they have refused for 7 years to accept that this is the end of the story. Next slide. I told you earlier about the revolution, the sit-ins, the poetry, the women in white. The generals tried to drown that in the Nile on the 3rd of June, and they failed because the same neighborhood committees that organized the revolution simply kept organizing. When the war came, they became the emergency response rooms, volunteers drawing on Nafir, that word again, the showing up for each other I told you was woven into who we are, running soup kitchens and clinics and evacuations, negotiating for release of like detainees across every line of tribe and politics. They now reach around 4 million people the UN has ignored. They have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice. And there's this, I mean, I was on the way to work once and I was texting my best friend whilst also reading about the resistance committees. It was like this paper. And I came across the story of an engineering student who was 19 years old. So like way younger than me and probably way younger than anybody here. He lived in Darfur and he was killed trying to restore electricity to the final hospital working in Darfur. And he died and was successful. You know, he was martyred. He was martyred standing up, you know, as the Al Fashid committee say. There's also a volunteer called Asim in a bombed out town in South Kordofan. He said the people there wake each morning not knowing if they will find food or clean water. And then he gets up and he goes to find it for them. And I think that's the heart of Stan, not the generals. Asim, the committees, Muhammad Adam are, you know, the people that died protecting our community. And you know, the women in white who are the granddaughters of warrior queens, and Muhammad, who wants nothing now except to bury his children with dignity. They are what is being killed, and they are worth everything. Next slide. I started with Muhammad Adam, a father who carried his family out of a dying city and reached a refugee camp with empty arms. His daughter was 13. I mean, think of what any of us are like at 13. I mean, we're discovering, you know, makeup and, you know, we're on the cusp of growing up and imagine your life being cut short then. Or his son, who was 1.5. I mean, that's an infant. He wasn't even allowed to bury them. And I don't think that any of us can give Muhammad his children back. You know, I cannot unburn the villages or rebuild the museum or unmake the graves that you can see from space. But I can stand amongst you as a Sudanese woman and refuse to let it be true that nobody saw, nobody knew, nobody could have stopped it, because that is a lie. It was foretold, which means it was preventable, which means that right now, today, in Kordofan, where another El Fashir is threatening to happen, it is still preventable. I am not you know, I'm not asking you tonight to fix Sudan. I think I'm asking you to carry it. I want you to leave this call unable to call it tribal or a civil war, unable to call it far away, unable ever again to say that nobody knew, because now you know. Carry the pyramids. I mean, carry the women in white, carry Asim and Muhammad and the 76% of women that died in an MSF clinic, in the last functioning maternity hospital in Sudan. Carry the 5,000-year-old country that overthrew a dictator with its bare hands and has never, not once, stopped fighting for itself. I want you to remember the name El Fashir, and I somehow have ended this half an hour earlier than I was meant to. But I think this is what I want to leave you on, just El Fashid, because I know that you guys all know about it, especially now, but it's a completely different thing to sit with those numbers. I mean, 6,000 people killed across 3 days is not a normal figure. Um, yeah, I think that's it.